A bit of a disclaimer before we start tonight's show, because tonight's going to really matter on this one. So, this is a reminder that this program will address various topics related to mental health, addiction, and always a reminder about multiple sclerosis. These may be sensitive to some of our viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. We remind you to please consult your doctor, your mental health professional, your outreach group, your sponsor, or specialist before adopting any change to your dietary, physical, and/or mental health regime. If you are looking for options to reach with respect to mental health, contact SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, at 1-800-662-HELP. That's 1-800-662-4357. The service is open 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and is a confidential free information service for individuals and family members facing such stressors. Importantly, and very importantly, if you're feeling suicidal crisis or emotional distress and need to be put in touch with a crisis center, call the Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. It's 1-800-273-8255. Or go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org. You can also text the word HOME to 741-741. Those resources are also available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And then I would be remiss not to talk about the National MS Society. As you know, I was diagnosed with MS back in January. It's something that has been a part of my life for the last 10 years, either by way of multiple sclerosis itself or the demyelinating event I received in 2011. So let's talk about that for a second. The National MS Society is a collective of passionate individuals who want to do something about MS now, to move together towards a world free of multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis is comprised of unpredictable and often disabling flare-ups of the central nervous system. Such flare-ups disrupt the flow of information within the brain and between the brain and the body. The National MS Society is the largest private funder of MS researchers in the world, investing more than $1 billion to date. MS stops people from moving, but the National MS Society exists to make sure that MS doesn't. To contact the National MS Society, please call 1-800-344-4867. Once again, 1-800-344-4867, or go to their website at nationalmssociety.org. Thank you for all of you who have donated money to this amazing organization. It touches me and over the 1 million people in this country that have multiple sclerosis in so many ways, and we appreciate all of you. And on that, let's begin. We've talked about mental health before on this show, and tonight we're going to revisit it. We're going to discuss a couple of the key concepts that I have gravitated to over the last 2.5 years that has been really instrumental in this journey. This very important journey that's not only my physical health, but my mental health as well. We'll talk about all of that and take your questions and comments, because this is the Venture Forward. Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you may be, and welcome to the Venture Forward. I am John Venturini, a recovering addict of overeating, obesity, alcoholism, and compulsive gambling, and it is an honor and pleasure to see all of you tonight on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch as we talk about mental health for another time on this show. I think, given an amazing vacation, given the amazing people that I've come across in the last 2.5 years, but definitely the last year and a half, I would be remiss not to have a conversation about this tonight. And I know I keep on talking about the components of internal family systems. I'm going to work a little bit into that tonight. Give you a little bit of an understanding of what I mean by a firefighter, what I mean by a manager, what I mean by an exile, what I mean by all that. Kind of put some method behind the madness, so to speak. But, as I said before, I want to say hello to all of you on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. And on YouTube, we have Jamie, who says, "Hi, JV." Hi, Jamie. Hope you're well. And we have Marcus. Hi, Marcus. Hope you're doing well as well. I think in order for us to understand exactly why we are talking about this, and moreover, why it is important for me to talk about this and keep this prevalent in my mind, we have to rewind the tape in the sense that there is only one strong reason. Well, there's others, but they're on the periphery, right? There's one strong reason why the weight came back on. There is one strong reason why I gravitated back to drinking, and there was one strong reason why I kept on drinking. And that's because everything was not right inside. One could say it's probably a disagreement between the firefighters and the managers that are working within myself. And we'll talk about that in just mere seconds. But that said, let's talk a bit about this, right? In the sense that we've talked about mental health before. We've talked about the importance of going for therapy. We've talked about the importance of journaling. We've talked about all of this. But I think there really has become a resonance in what a sound mind and sound body can do. If you combine mind and body, it becomes body, right? And that was very prevalent in the last 10 days. I couldn't get over how incredible the time away was, but moreover, how full of life I felt. Like I really was feeling everything around me. Feeling the environment, feeling the people and the places and the things for what they are worth. I don't think I was ever in that sort of mindset before. Now I am. But that took a large sort of work down as far as exactly how do I fix this? Not only physically. Obviously, being at 480 pounds doesn't give you much of a life. And also, not being one who gravitates to gambling and drinking doesn't perceive one's life as well, in the sense that I need to do better than that. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about in tonight's show. Let's talk about catch up real quick. A few thoughts that were playing on top of my mind in addition to what I just talked about. Let's also talk about what internal family systems is. Moreover, the parts of internal family systems. We talk about the phrases we've used over and over and over again on this show. We'll get into that. Then we're going to take a few minutes out to talk about the power of journaling. And I need to go back to Maine for 1 second to say something. In the sense that journaling has become a very important thing in my journey. Anybody who discounts the power of journaling or being accountable for one's thought, and at least getting everything out on paper or what have you, is doing themselves a major disservice. Moreover, if the people around them don't have the strongest frame, they might be doing damage to them as well. We're going to talk about how important journaling is in mere minutes. but it's going to be important that we talk about it tonight, for sure. And then, of course, we're going to take your questions and comments as we move along on tonight's show. Let's have a catch-up first. 3 key thoughts here. 1, I'm experiencing a little bit of drop in the sense that, and when we talk about drop, it's sort of the coming off of an incredible experience, a great experience, and feeling a bit of the doldrums. Maybe a back to normalcy, back to what have you. I'm feeling a bit of drop right now. That also talks to how amazing the vacation was. And again, thanks again to everybody in Portland, and thanks again to everybody I met in Los Angeles. You really, really are incredible people, and you've done wonders. Not only for yourselves, but you've done wonders for me too. So I'm muchly appreciative of that. I guess the next piece of that is the ongoing dilemma of travel, but also remaining true to oneself. And why I put that in the list is the sense that traveling in a time not so long ago was an excuse for me to do things that can best be deemed nefarious. I would say, dare I say, firefighter before bringing up that slide. I was always gravitating to things that were very empty in the sense that I drank, I ate way too much, I gambled, and on this vacation it was freeing not to worry about that because it was not part of my life anymore. So, that is the thing. I say dilemma because we are always having that in the back of our minds. As anyone who's an addict will know, or anyone who is an addict will talk to, we are always fighting that fight. But to be surrounding yourself with a very healthy environment, to surround yourselves with the most incredible of people, doing the most incredible things, works wonders as far as overcoming that dilemma. Which leads me to my last point. Better scenery, better things to do, better life. In a nutshell, that's exactly what that 10-day vacation exactly was. Better scenery, better things to do, better life. Very grateful for that. And go back to Maine for a second. And say hi to people who have joined us along the way here. We got Paul, co-host of VF Talks on Friday. Paul, I hope you're doing well. Desmond over on Facebook says, "Good day, John. Good to see you." Desmond, good to see you this morning. Probably morning over there. Good morning to you. And then Sarah over on YouTube says, "Hi, JB." Hi, Sarah. Hope you're doing well. And Des on Facebook says, "It does get easier with time." You're darn straight it does. But it takes time. It takes that time investment to get there. So, yeah. Little by little, one day at a time, one step at a time, one foot in front of the other, as we always say. And boy, is that true. It is very true. So, what is ourself? Well, that seems like a... What do you mean by what is herself? Well, there are components that comprise our being. There are things that we have to work on and work with to figure out exactly who's owning the conversation, who is basically owning our thought process. The mind is comprised of many parts, all of which is in charge of ourself. Now, there may be different actors that are playing in front of that, especially if we have many different jobs, many different things to do. Obviously, there'll be a lot of different things at play, but we have to be fully accountable of what all those parts are. And that's kind of the cornerstones behind the idea of internal family systems, in the sense that we are not just one person. We're not just one part. We are composed of many different parts. Everyone has a self, and that is the self that runs our internal system. That's our thought process. That's our mind. That's our physical movement. That's all of that. I guess the other key thing is, and take this for what you will, there are no such thing as a bad part. When we talk about how bad firefighters are, I throw terms as far as nefarious and malevolent. At the end of the day, Are they really a bad part? No, if we have a better handle on top of what that part is bringing us and we learn the lessons of what that part provides, we are actually overcoming that part. We're actually one with that part. So we don't deem it necessarily as a bad part, but we always look for the things that give us the non-extreme, because there's also the question of we want to live a life that is manageable, a life that can be maintained. It's not running off the rail, so to speak. The goal, of course, is to achieve balance and harmony, because that is the most sustainable. And at the end of the day, we're not going to keep on top of everything as we get older and older and older. With balance and harmony, we do that because we provide ourselves inner health that way. Not only physically, but mentally as well. I should reverse that. Mentally and physically. Both parts have that harmony and that balance. Basically, competent, secure, self-confident is what I meant to say, relaxed. Boy, if there wasn't any sort of sign of what relaxation was, that was definitely the last 10 days. And then basically when we have all those things in check, we're not so thick-headed not to poo-poo upon feedback and not poo-pooing based on listening. I think our most important skill is the ability to listen and provide and take in feedback, but also understanding exactly what conversations and what settings that feedback is going back and forth. And then also being fully aware if such feedback can be, dare I say, triggering. Because when there's triggering sort of events, triggering sort of words, triggering sort of ulterior motives, if you will, nothing beneficial can come out of that conversation. Couple comments as I was going through that. Ingy on YouTube says, good evening to you, great people. Good evening to you, Ingy. Thanks again for a wonderful time a week and a half ago. And Jamie says, hi to Ingy. It's so cool you got this. Hope you're well. I tell you, that was a great trip for sure. I think that's the other thing is the sense that we really, I recount saying this a few times while in Portland and LA, we really lost the sort of connection between people being in quarantine and lockdown and whatnot. And to have everybody around us, even for seconds or minutes, or to share a meal with, I think has been something where we all have felt a bit more relief, but a bit more whole in all of that. So definitely something we must never lose sight of is that important connection with people. Anyhow, going back to what I'm saying about internal family systems. And actually, I'm going to bring that comment up real quick. Yeah, that's exactly right, Sarah. It's social atrophy. It's exactly what it is. I understand why we were in the situation we were in. For the sake of public health, I understand why we were in the situation we were in. But I can also totally be very, very transparent about the social effects that has brought upon all of us. And over the next few weeks and months, we should talk more about that. How does that affect you? Let us know, please. And let's talk about that. Ingy says, it was very cool, and Jamie, I hope you're too. So we talk about ourself. So we talk about various groups of parts. We talked about this many times before, throwing out these nouns like it's been basic second nature on this show, but we talk about firefighters, we talk about managers, and we talk about exiles. Those are the three major parts of that sort of dance that goes on with us as far as our self to part relationship, as far as how we handle things. And we're going to talk about how those three different parts play with each other, in the sense that an exile is like that wild horse in the upper left-hand corner The manager is overseeing things, trying to do the best thing for us to make sure that the work that is being done, the work of life, is done in the most benevolent factor, the benevolent sort of way. And then the firefighters are throwing water at things and trying to put out the fire by any means possible. The manager and the firefighter are both doing the same job, so to speak. They have different methods in how they fight that sort of situation, that gap, that fire, whatever sort of noun you want to throw at it. So what's an exile? Exiles are basically the parts of ourselves that experience trauma. That's the things in us that that became isolated from the rest of our systems for one reason or another. It could be something that is the most traumatic. It could be something that is not so traumatic. But nevertheless, it caused us to be in exile, or parts of us to be in exile. Again, it's the sort of thing where that sort of thing is siphoned off to protect us from feeling the pain, the terror, the fear, all of that. Sometimes we find that we go down that road by way of drinking. Sometimes we go down that road, and when I say drinking, obviously that's a firefighter here. By gambling, by overeating, by drug use. But that's an exile. That's an exile situation. If we're exiled, we are becoming increasingly extreme. So we talked before how we want to move towards a world that's not so extreme. But in an exile situation, when parts of us are exiled, we are in the extreme. And we're desperate to be cared for and to tell our story. Because at the end of the day, it's about getting our ideas out. Whether it is with a therapist, whether it's journaling, it's getting our ideas out. And the more we bottle that in, the more we are self-destructing. That's what's going on. If we're transparent about what we're experiencing, the better off we're going to be. It's when we bottle things up, whether it's a bottle up all over the place or just a bottle up externally, that's when we run into a problem. It can leave the individual feeling fragile, vulnerable, and I would say in dangerous sort of situations of doing things that can seriously harm themselves. What does it mean for me? It means someone who used to drink, someone who used to overeat, someone who used to gamble, because he gravitated to the dopamine drip of the gambling, dealt with the sort of feelings that alcohol would bring on, and dealt with the satisfaction that overeating brought. Even though this person was eating way, way, way too many calories, well beyond the metabolic rate for someone who was that size. Sarah says, the needs to be seen and to belong. Yes, it's about belonging. Whether it's finding your community, whether it's finding any sort of group, finding a bunch of people that you end up finding to be more family than anyone else. It's about being in a situation or with people that you feel like you belong, or being around things where you belong, or being in places where you belong. It's absolutely right, Sarah. So we have exiles. So what's a manager? A manager are the parts that basically run the day-to-day life of the individual. These are the parts of the parts of ourselves that basically make sure that everything's working to some sort of benevolent cadence or some sort of operating cadence. Maybe a cadence that's not out there to self-destruct us. It's to keep us in a benevolent control of every situation and relationship to protect ourselves from any hurt or rejection. No one wants to be rejected. We might be better with rejection over time, but out of the get-go, we're not really one with rejection. It's something we have to work towards. To be accepted, to belong, is definitely where we want to gravitate to. So that's obviously part of the course here. Finding the people, the places, and the things that make us feel that sense of belonging is of paramount nature, for sure. This can be done in a number of ways, a combination of parts. I mean, the thing is, we want to be able to strive and control the situation, but we also feel like we need a caretake. Now, the place where we have a manager that is not the best manager is when it starts terrorizing. That's not part of being any sort of benevolent. That's actually a negative manager. As hard to believe as that, there can be such a thing as a negative manager, in the sense that we have to stay away from that sort of thing. Because if at the end of the day we're looking for that harmony, there's no room for that. It's one of the very few verbs with managing that is not the greatest of situations. But everything else is more benevolent than that. So then let's talk about firefighting. Because it's the word that I think I have said at least 19 or 20 times on this show. We talk about firefighting. We talk about firefighting by way of drinking. We talk about firefighting by way of overeating. We talk about firefighting by way of gambling. We talk about firefighting by way of reckless spending, reckless fiduciary sort of responsibility. That's firefighting. These are the groups of parts that react when exiles are activated to control and extinguish feeling. So when that red alarm's going off, that red alert's going off rather, that's the thing that's being shot at with lots of water. And the water can be not the most greatest of activity, the most healthy of activity. Notice that the examples are not the greatest examples, are there? Drug or alcohol use, overeating, gambling. In this sort of graphic, we talk about self-mutilation, binge eating, sex binges. These are very much malevolent, nefarious behaviors. But when we are pushed to the brink, that's our body's coping mechanism. It is not the right coping mechanism. It is far from the right coping mechanism. But sometimes we go down that road. Firefighting has the same goals as our managers do. But as you can see, the strategies are completely different. They're more of an active sort of strategy, one that always rides on dopamine drip or any sort of biochemical response. Whereas with a managing strategy, it is more higher level. It is more accounting. It is more of trying to figure out the why, the where, the when, the how, that sort of thing. So you can see two different strategies. More times than not, the managing strategy is better and more benevolent. There is the one malevolent managing strategy, and that of terrorization. But then in firefighting, usually more times than not, is a very negative coping mechanism. I think about the various managers and firefighters I've had in this life. And we know about the obvious ones. But I know of situations where I had things that are normally deemed a firefighter actually acting as a manager. I won't talk to that exactly on this episode. But as we go down the road, there are people, places, and things that actually have helped me that may have not been. More times than not, 9 times out of 10, can always looked upon to be a firefighter, as I start mixing up words. But there are very few times where they can actually act in a benevolent way. In the coming weeks, we will start talking to exactly that. But realize that these parts play part in part with trying to heal ourselves or trying to work through the things that forced us to be in exile in the first place. One of the key components of being true with all this is getting our thoughts out, being transparent with our thoughts, being transparent with what we're feeling. There is nothing wrong with what we are feeling. We should be very transparent with that. If not to anyone else, at least to ourselves. And that's why no matter what sort of therapy you go for, journaling is a clear component of that. So let's talk about why we journal. We've talked about journaling before at high level. But let's talk about why journaling is important with this. Why do we journal? 5 key reasons. This is from Intermountains Healthcare. The website is down the bottom there. First and foremost, our emotional function gets strengthened because we definitely have a better handle on what we're feeling because we are at least talking about it to some way, some form, somewhere. That in itself reduces our stress. So when we get pushed against something, when our frame starts bending, we definitely have a better mechanism of overcoming that. That in itself, because our body is starting to work towards a sort of calmer place, one can argue that our immune function becomes better. I could find an article or two that talks to that. It's not on this slide. But there is truth as far as our physical health being basically being somewhat proportional to what we are feeling mentally. As far as our memory, it becomes sharper. Because notice that when you are feeling stressed and under pressure, one of the first things that goes is our memory. If our memory is sharp and we're being transparent, the two work part and parcel, right? It means that we have a better handle on things, but moreover, we have a better handle on ourselves. And when we have a better handle on ourselves, we then have better handles on others. It goes back to the old airplane mask sort of analogy. When the cabin pressure goes out, you cover yourself first with the mask, then you cover everyone else. You definitely have to cover yourself with the mask first. And then if it anything else, it's a mood booster. To have that sort of smile or a glimpse of a smile on one's face is very important on how we deal with life. Even when pressed upon something that could be a little bit of an annoying or agitating situation, if we're walking into that situation with a positive mood, then that sort of agitating situation is not going to basically drive us all the way. Sarah says, as I can find my mouse, there it is. Transparency is very challenging for exiles. Yes, it is. And that is one of the things that gets worked on immediately. Is the importance and how painful it is to be transparent. What sort of benefit, what sort of key benefacting event occurs by being transparent? What sort of pros that are there in being transparent? It's not easy. It is far from easy. Is it an introvert versus extrovert sort of thing? Maybe. I haven't completely researched that piece. I would say being extroverted might help towards it, but it's not a bona fide cure-all to that question. But yes, transparency is very challenging for exiles. That exile mindset within our system. So we talked about journaling many times on this show, and I've given some journal entries. I've talked about exactly what I journal, but there's a good article in the New York Times. I think it's 2 years old. It's called What's All This About Journaling? And there are 5 key things that are talked about in that article. It's okay for your journal to be a brain drain. You got to get your thoughts out. Even if the things that are in that brain drain are of a whiny nature. And I know there's some people that are in this viewing audience that doesn't like the whiny stuff, that doesn't like that sort of thing. But if we have a handle on at least saying, okay, we're feeling that, and we're becoming accountable and transparent about that, at least to ourselves, that is beneficial. Now, do we always gravitate that by way of excuse or whatnot? Absolutely not. Because we own what we do. But if we have a place for us to be transparent about what we're feeling, that's the most important thing. The only way you know about what goes in your journal is by journaling. Even if it is just pictures or things that you're feeling, go ahead and journal. It's not a sort of situation where you have to spend hours upon hours doing it. But you devote that time to yourself, because any time that is comprised to our self-care, that is beneficial to our self-care, is the most important time we could spend. Jamie had a really good question. I have to get on graphic real quick here. She asks, whiny stuff, do you mean like complaining or boo-boo feelings? Yeah, in a way. That's one of it. It's certainly not all of it. I think that in itself, if we're saying something is whiny, we may be very hard on ourselves on something being whiny, when it really, at the end of the day, is not really whiny at all. I guess the point is, Jamie, no matter what, we should write it down. And using the excuse that something is whiny should never be an excuse whatsoever. Write it down. Get your thoughts down. Nothing should be off limits is the next key point of this. No matter how euphoric or traumatic the experience is, we should journal about it. And that may be more painful than anything else. But we have to be very transparent to ourselves about it. We have to be one with it. Because as we advance in age, sometimes we forget. Not to the level, to degree that we think of coming off of said experience. So it's very much important to be clear about it. Especially if we're going to a therapist on a regular basis, we must write this stuff down. Because our therapist is always going to wonder what we're doing in a given week, or what we're doing in a given fortnight, or how often we see our therapist. So we have to be very clear about that to ourselves. And I think the last point, and one of the key points that came out of this article, is that writing can be the practice that gets us closer to healing. Because we are becoming one with all these things. We could talk about the sort of effects of what writing on a regular basis can bring to us as far as improving that skill. At the end of the day, it's great, but I think becoming clear with what we're feeling, becoming clear with how we're feeling, is the most important thing. Whether it is very traumatic or very euphoric. And I'll show you an example of euphoric in about 3 minutes. Something I wrote while I was on vacation. Jamie says, don't minimize it or brush it. Don't brush it under either by saying it's whiny. Write it down. Cool. Thank you. Absolutely write it down. Paul has a very good question. Do you ever burn anything you write to let it go? Yes. And you talk about people that, you talk about thoughts around manifesting things. There are a lot of thoughts out there as far as manifesting, as far as burning something either for a benevolent nature or to be rid of it. When you're writing something down for a wish of things that you're trying to manifest, you write it down, you basically burn it, and you hope that the universe takes it to what we need to get what we want out of this life. So yes, I have written stuff to burn, to let it go. But I've also written stuff to burn, to send out to the universe. Wishing for things, hoping for things. It works both ways. Great question, by the way. Jamie says, burning stuff to send into the universe to either day goodbye or to manifest it. Big fan. Yes, I'm a big fan of it as well. We can manifest a lot of things in this life. If anyone has a hard time with basically believing that, you're talking to someone who used to be very morbidly obese and basically put a list of things out in the universe that he had to fix. It was a nervous breakdown in the middle of Raleigh-Durham Airport, but also a list of things that I was basically dealing with that I wrote at home and burned. To be skinnier, to be confident, to be rid of the things that was holding me back. Because at the end of the day, I was being held back. Whether by myself or by others or by other things, by other places. I was being held back. And I'm being fully accountable of the things I did to go harm myself in that sort of way. But I also asked the universe to be passing of the things that were holding me back too. That list was set on fire in my driveway. That was 2+ years ago. I don't know what that does for you, but that certainly is something I remember fully clear about how important that has been in this journey. Easy over on YouTube says hello. Easy, hope you're doing well. Easy says, I don't burn it. I shred it and place it in my compost. There's another method. If you feel that sort of cathartic release from it, good on you, Easy. Good on you for sure. I think the last thing I want to talk about is an example of a thing I journal. Because sometimes, every now and then, I journal poetry. And during this trip, I was very much touched by the people, places, things, nature, what have you, that was around me. So much so that I wrote a poem that I put on Facebook, but I also put in my journal, obviously. And it's called Next to an Evergreen. This was written on September 25th. And it goes something like this. Not a cloud in the sky. Why does this feel like home? Was I wrong all the time? Or was I wrong all this time, being true to the keystone? Perhaps it is now time to move west and to continue this journey here, there, and in between. As now I feel the most at peace, writing this next to an evergreen. The trip really did something for me. I'm not sure if that is a telltale sign or a calling for me to move west, but I was definitely moved enough to write it. And I was definitely moved enough feeling it. So that was just a realization. And next to that poem in my journal is that picture. Picture as I was basically strolling along the Columbia River and being struck by the cascades and vistas that were around me. That is definitely a picture that I hold on to. Couple more comments. Jamie says, oh my God, beautiful. And Jamie says, let your soul guide you, JV. I'm doing the best I can, Jamie. Without a doubt, I'm doing the best I can. Without question. Let's talk about the next episode on Thursday. We were supposed to have a conversation that I have not solidified yet. And if that's the case and we don't have that interview, I will do a continuation of this topic, as well as the realization of other things I learned in the last 2 weeks and how that means to the rest of this journey. I really came to some very amazing moments that I'm very thankful for. So we'll talk about that. If not on Thursday, if that interview actually happens on Thursday, then we will talk about it next week sometime. But I definitely want to talk to that because it was just, you know, I always hear the term chicken soup for the soul. There was a lot of chicken soup there. Incredible amounts. Of course, Easy comes up with a comment that I'm going to bring up on screen. He says, as long as you don't get struck by a car when deep in meditation as you walk the Columbia Bridge. Yeah, that's a very good point. It's always safety first. We're always about safety here. Safety first. So we don't want anyone to get hit or, you know, hit off a bridge. None of the sort. So definitely safety first, Easy. For sure. So the next episode, whatever the topic is, whether it's the interview or a continuation of this start, will be Thursday night at 8 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Pacific. And then, as always, on Friday, we will have another episode of EF Talks, where we talk about anything and everything with Paul Burke and Matt Haas and all of you, as we end the week always having the best conversations ever. Easy reminds me of out of AA, that is Rule 62. It is certainly Rule 62. It certainly is. And thank you for putting that up there, Easy, for sure. Oh, man, that was funny. But on that, I'm going to say the same thing I say to you at the end of every Venture Forward and VF Talks. Stay safe, stay sane, stay strong, stay sober. You're worth it. I'll see you Thursday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific for the next episode of the Venture Forward. Have a great night and fly be free.